Today, I am building a clamp storage rack that'll house whatever kind of clamps you are using in your shop, and can be customized from 15 inches to 90 inches in length to fit your space. Currently, I have this space for clamps. It was a quick throw together, and it's been around for a couple years. My mistake, and one I hopefully can help you guys avoid, is that this really only accommodates one type of clamp: bar clamps. It was set up for the clamps I currently owned, plus a few extra, and really leaves me no space for growth. And my OG clamps are still doing great. Generally, for anything that I'm working on, I'm reaching for a smaller 6-inch or jumping up to a 12-inch or 24-inch. A wide variety of clamps exist: pipe clamps, parallel bar clamps, pistol grip, cool name, pipe clamps, C-clamps, and the list goes on for some time. So I started researching and gathering data to build the ultimate clamp holder, which I actually found on the Rockler website. Just a little background before you blink your eyes and I've got all the pieces cut and we're moving on in the project. I've got a 54-inch by 48-inch piece of plywood that I'm using. I'm hoping to get everything done with just this one almost half sheet. I'm going to add 1.5 inches because that's my total distance between, to put my cedar picket at 13. Look how straight that bad boy is. I don't know how I got blessed with such straight pickets. So I'm going to set this up at 13. This is going to ride against it to give me an 11.5-inch cut. I'm going to get two 11.5-inch cuts, and then the rest I'm just going to cut for 4 inches so I have the rest of the bracing for my pieces. I mean, you guys get it, right? All right. I'm going to have this as the bottom because I'm going to look up and see the bottom. I don't actually see the top unless I'm like within 1 foot of the height of my ceiling. So this is going to be the new bottom. So this right here is the back. And with the back, I am just going to measure in 2 inches. Again, making it up as we go. Measure in 2 inches. Set those lines. Take a pretty straight piece of wood, and you're going to score it lightly just because you might want to sand these off when you're done. That was too light. I can see it. Yeah. So that is scored onto here. Now, again, everything to my right is my right because I'm going to flip it upside down. So I'm going to measure over to 9 inches. Make my mark. Then I'm going to measure over 7.5-inch increments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. Half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. Half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Recount. Half. 1, 2, 3, 4. Recount again. Half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half. Lands me at 46 and a half. Plus that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is my end point. Hey, you guys want the measurements? It's going to be at 9, 16 and a half, 24, 31 and a half, 39, and 46 and a half. And then on my ending, I'm going to have it at 52 and a half. Now, you guys can end wherever you want. If you only wanted to have 2 out at 16 and a half, measure over your 6 inches, draw your line. That is where you end. So wherever your end point is, if you only wanted 1 of them, measure over 6 inches. Wherever your end line is. Now, I wouldn't be able to obviously go here farther, so that's where I stopped. Completely up to you guys. Now, that's however big or small you want to make them. If you want to make them stand alone as just a 1 clampy holder, 2 clampy holder, 3, 4, mine is a 5. So for 5 of them, you're going to need a 52.5-inch board. So I have those measurements. With these measurements I just put on, I'm going to measure 3/4 of an inch to both sides. Nay, I'm going to measure what? 7/8 of an inch to both sides, and that's to get me 1 3/4 total. I'll put those measurements in there for you as well. The old plans. The end mark we do not have to do because this is waste to me. So I'm going to chop this off on the miter saw once I get over to that point. Now for these, I'm going down to my mark. Do I have that much space? I do. To mark them like this. Making sure everything is nice and square. And you're going to make your marks to the end. These you do want to be able to see, and that is just because you're going to be lining a board up to them regardless. So you're not going to see those lines. Once you have those lines drawn on your board, you're going to move the 9-inch, 16.5, 24, 31.5. You're going to move those lines, the centering lines, down onto that 2-inch line that we drew to start. And you're doing that because you're going to bring in your hole saw. This is how many times I've said this because I circle it each time. You're going to bring in the hole saw, and we are going to be cutting this out. So wait on these lines. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're going to cut these out to 1 3/4. That's the diameter of the hole saw, and that's also the width of these slats that we're going to be cutting in. So we're going to cut those out. 1 3/4 does come on the cheaper Craftsman Cobalt sets that you can buy, not like the big fancy spider ones. You can get them on the cheapy sets. Another reason it's going to be 1 3/4 because we have that option as a smaller hole saw. So transfer those lines onto there. I am also going to set up my 34-inch board and trim off this extra. I'm going to cut this extra, cut that one down, draw it all out, have my hole saws. All right, I guess I'm also using the cheapy set because my expensive set does not have an, oh, I could have just read this. My expensive set doesn't have a 1 3/4. So to the cheapy set we go. 2 pro tips on this one. 1, make sure you don't accidentally grab the 2-inch hole saw. And 2, once you start drilling down, when you can see that the center point has made it through the other side of the board, go ahead and flip over and drill out from this side, and that prevents it from blowing out all of your plywood. And that way you get a clean hole on both sides. Now we have the holes drilled in our 6-arm and our 4-arm piece. This is just the smaller one that's going to go underneath the big one, so that way I have a rack or two that I can hang super long clamps and they can go past this one. It's going to look nice. So with the holes drilled in there, we have 2 options moving forward. And one of them requires the router. I know some people don't have a router, so you can completely bypass it. It's just to make it look a little bit nicer at the end. So first, you're going to take your jigsaw regardless. Option 1, you're going to take your jigsaw, you're going to run it perfectly on this line and cut out these centers. What you risk with that is blowing out the edges. Again, if it has a 1, 2, or 0 setting, put it on that 0 setting just so it's not as aggressive. And I always use a metal blade in mine. I rarely will use a wood blade because wood blades are extremely aggressive. Cuts through this just fine. So you can take your jigsaw, cut these out perfect, and things are peachy. You are done. The second option, you can cut just anywhere. It doesn't even have to be a straight line. You can cut to the inside, remove all of this excess material, and then once I have the boards screwed into place, glued and done, I can use a flush cut router bit and go over the top and get them lined up perfectly. So I don't have any blowout. I don't have to worry about the lines not being straight. It will be perfect at the end. That is what I am going to do. So let me show you an option 1 just because I already messed this one up, so why not? All right, and that is option 1, just cutting it out with the jigsaw. It is going to blow out a little bit of your plywood. It's not my favorite way to do it, but I've been there. If that's the only way we can get things done, that's how we're doing it. It is getting pretty flimsy because I'm only getting that 1.5 inches. and I would hate to snap off when I get like halfway down here because of the weight of the board. So I am going to go ahead and mount my backboard onto here. So it's just going to go right here. You are going to cut it to length, whatever size you guys are using. And then I'm going to pocket screw one in the center of every one of these spots just so it looks nice and clean. You don't want to pocket screw it into this one just because it's going to create a weak point. And also when these boards come in, you're going to pocket screw into this board as well. So just keep them kind of centered. I'm not measuring them. I'm just going to center them to the best of my abilities after I get it cut down to size. So I'm going to mount the back boards onto each of these. Before I can show you guys how to cut these grooves out perfectly with the router, you will need to build these bracing pieces. And I told you, like snap of a finger and the project's like almost done. We're going to go over all of it. So if you guys had used your jigsaw to cut out all the grooves, this is the next step in the process. Otherwise, we're taking a pause. We have to do this before I can use the router. So to build these little guys, what I had done to make this little groove in the front, I set my miter saw over to 45 degrees to make this initial groove cut, then back to 90 degrees, and I cut them to length. This one was an 1/8 inch shorter than this one, so definitely measure the piece that you are cutting. Make sure you are not adding in this backer piece since it's butting up against it, so that way your pieces sit nice and flush to the front. If you guys are using the jigsaw, these can be farther back if you want them to. For the router, they do need to go all the way to the very front, and that's because we're using that flush cut bit, and this is technically our guide. So once you have them cut down to size, I did add some pocket holes into here, some Kreg screw spots, and I left them on the bigger side. I'd like to hide them inside. That's going to be a nightmare to try to screw everything together, especially into here. So I did just leave them on the exteriors in these bigger spots, and I'm letting him cool down because he literally just drilled out 48 holes. So with this, I did just take it apart. I took this guy out so that way he's not in there. Keeps these a little closer together. Make sure you don't mess up and put it on the side that's doesn't need a Kreg screw. And then also this one I messed up. I wasn't paying attention. Poop. But for these to make them correctly, start on your shorter 4-inch spot. I line up my little Kreg guide and I use this hole. The reason I'm not using the hole closest to the top is because it is going to be harder to get your drill down into there, and I just find it harder to use these. So I always put it up a little bit higher. So I left these holes so that it's easier for my drill to get in there, especially when it's right here. So I drilled these out first, and then I just lined up the, again, Kreg guide so that it just touches the bottom of where these holes were drilled out. And then I screwed one closest to that hole just so it gave them more spacing. And then for the front, again, I just line it up with the bottom, go with the one on the inside just to make everything nice and clean. And then that makes all of your holes match for all of the pieces. You don't have to measure, mark, nothing. I just use this and the edges as my guides. To add these bracing pieces, I do just want to make sure that it is square to the back and that up and down it is also square. So a little bit of tweaking on there. I did add a clamp to the bottom, and that's just to pull this backboard because it was kind of angled forward. I wanted to pull it back with this so I can get this corner nice and tight. So I did add a clamp for this. I should only need like one clamp. I'd say one probably here. I'll put one in the center, and then I'll put the one on the end using the clamp. The rest of them, they should just flex in there just fine because then my board is corrected since they are Kregged in and it kind of pushes the board around. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get these Kreg screwed together, and we're almost there, minus the grooves. And that takes care of majority of that interior. So I'm going to just go and cut the rest of these out real quick. Not sure what you guys were doing with that split-second transition, but I finished cutting out the waste product of the grooves. I anchored down this piece, so unless my entire workbench moves around, the piece is good to go. It's not going to move when I'm running the router. A little bit of safety on that. With the router, there are a couple different flush cut bits. You have them that have the bearing on the very top, and they have some that have the bearing on the bottom. Some have a bearing on both of them. This one requires the bearing to be on the top because it is getting plunged into the workpiece and riding against that bracing system. So you want the bearing to be on the bottom to run as a guide, so that way you can cut away the top material to match the underside material. So make sure that your bearing is on the top, your depth is set correctly so that if it's too high, it will hit your Kreg screws, the little pocket hole in divots. You don't want that, so set this guy accordingly. This guy, I've set it to a softwood, so it's running 25,000 RPM. This router actually comes with the plunge cut part, and it's 119 bucks on Amazon. I'll put a link in the description. A super good starter router. A lot of people buy the Cobalt system. I have that one as well. This one completely blows it away. I like this little router. So get everything set up, and then all that we are going to be doing, because it's going to get loud, is you're going to cut in a clockwise area because we're on the interior of a project. You're on the exterior, you're cutting in a counterclockwise. Otherwise, you're cutting clockwise, and that's so that the direction of the blade doesn't want to pull it towards you. Again, safety. So we are running clockwise inside these grooves, cutting this direction, cutting this direction. P.S. Every dust particle does not hit the floor the second you take your mask off. So if you're running a router, running a sander, there's still stuff floating around the air. It can float around for up to 30 minutes. So I'm taking it off to talk to you guys, but just because you're done using the tool doesn't mean that that the air quality is better, you know? I'm just going to kiss it with a little piece of scrappy sandpaper. And then I'm just going to repeat that for all of the other ones. And then I'm going to redo this entire project to get that one set up. It's just taking a lot of time. If you guys are hanging up just one clamp holder, you guys are in the clear. Just hang it up. I hung mine up high because they are holding my bigger clamps on them. And it's easier to hang the bigger clamps than to take these smaller ones. Have to jump up and hang stuff all the time. So I want some distance between these and those. I don't use these clamps a lot because the little teeth things are getting pretty worn and gluey and they don't bite into it very well compared to these clamps. And I have more of these clamps. I kept those clamps because they're clamps, but they might hit the chopping block. So I can honestly go up to here, and even then I'm pretty much in line with those, so that's good. Now I hung a few clamps on the bottom because I do need that spacing down here. I don't want it to run into my air hose. I don't want things to be in the way per se. So this is really where my smaller clamps are going to be going. I could utilize these for some longer clamps if I chose to, but I'm just not. So I've got it level with the one up above, and I've got it level horizontally. So I'm going to grab my stud finder, find out where those studs are hiding out in my wall, and then really just screw and anchor it into the garage. I don't care.